a thrilling story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She just wanted to start over, but ended up in the home of a millionaire, marked by his wife's death. Now, surrounded by secrets, whispers, and a frightening desire, she must decide: run away or surrender. The problem: loving this man might be the last mistake of her life. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by it. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The interstate bus swayed along the winding road that cut through the Virginia mountains, and Hannah Vidal pressed her forehead against the foggy window, watching the landscape gradually transform. The crowded neighborhoods and tight apartment buildings of suburban Washington, D.C. gave way to hills covered with deciduous forest, scattered houses, and a thin mist that seemed to dance between the valleys. She carried only a small suitcase and a worn bag, all that remained of a life that had collapsed like a house of cards. 27 years old, and she felt as if she had lived 3 different lives. The first in a modest house in Brookside, with a mother who worked double shifts to pay for her education degree. The second in the Georgetown apartment, married to Mark, a lawyer who gradually revealed himself as a man who controlled everything from the clothes she wore to the friends she could talk to. And now this third life, or what was left of it, made of fragments, debts, and a profound exhaustion that seemed to have settled in her bones. The divorce had been a trench warfare that lasted 2 years. Mark had used every possible resource to prolong the process, claiming that Hannah suffered from emotional instability and deserved no alimony. She had spent all her savings on lawyers, sold the few possessions she managed to keep, and when she was finally free, discovered that freedom cost more than she had imagined. Without a home, without a steady job, sleeping on friends' couches who gradually lost patience, Hannah found herself forced to accept sporadic work, giving private lessons, babysitting, cleaning houses. Then came her mother's cancer. Grace, who had always been the rock in her life, began to waste away in a public hospital bed, among overcrowded corridors and medications that were slow to arrive. Hannah spent 3 months sleeping in a plastic chair next to the bed, watching the only person who truly loved her say goodbye in silence. When it was all over, she didn't cry at the funeral. She couldn't. It was as if all tears had dried up along with something essential inside her. It was on one of those empty mornings, browsing online classifieds at an internet cafe in Arlington, that Hannah found the advertisement. Caregiver wanted for child. House in isolated location, Blue Ridge Mountains. Experience with education preferred. Live-in position. Above average salary. The contact phone had a 540 area code, Shenandoah Valley region. She hesitated for a few minutes before dialing. The voice that answered was female, mature, with an accent that mixed East Coast with something more sophisticated. Hannah Vidal, I received your resume by email. Can you come tomorrow for an interview? The woman, who identified herself only as Mrs. Carmen, gave a complicated address, miles up in the mountains past Luray, on a secondary road that even GPS couldn't easily locate. Bring clothes for a few days. If it works out, you can stay. Hannah didn't have much to lose. In fact, she had nothing to lose. Now, as the bus climbed the mountains in increasingly tight curves, she wondered if she wasn't making another mistake. The landscape was beautiful, but there was something unsettling about the way the mist clung to the hills, as if it were hiding something. The houses became more sparse, many of them huge mansions with high gates and walls that prevented any view of what lay beyond. The driver stopped at a kind of junction where 3 dirt roads met. This is it, miss. Whitestone Road as you requested. Hannah got off with her modest luggage and stood there for a few minutes watching the bus disappear around a curve. The silence was almost physical, just the sound of wind in the trees and in the distance the barking of a dog. A white Toyota pickup appeared a few minutes later, raising a cloud of red dust. The driver was a middle-aged man, thin with a cap and flannel shirt. Hannah? She nodded. I'm John, caretaker of the property. Mrs. Carmen sent me to pick you up. The dirt road wound uphill for almost 20 minutes. John was laconic, responding to Hannah's attempts at conversation with polite monosyllables. She gave up trying to break the ice and concentrated on the landscape. The dense forest on both sides of the road seemed increasingly thick, punctuated by huge granite stones that gave the region its name. Occasionally she glimpsed a house in the distance, always isolated, always protected by high walls. There, John finally said, pointing to a wrought iron gate that rose between two stone pillars. Mr. Vincent's property. Hannah felt something strange upon hearing the name. Vincent. It wasn't a common name, had something foreign, sophisticated about it. The gate opened automatically when John pressed a remote control, and they followed an avenue lined with tall oak trees. The house gradually emerged through the vegetation, and Hannah held her breath. It was a colonial-style mansion, but adapted with contemporary elements that made it both imposing and welcoming. 3 stories of stone and wood, with wide porches and large windows that reflected the afternoon sky. Well-tended gardens extended in all directions, with beds of wildflowers, and a stone fountain in the center of the circular courtyard where John parked. Impressive the first time, commented John, noticing Hannah's expression. House is more than 100 years old, belonged to Mr. Vincent's family, then was renovated. He carried her suitcase to the main entrance. Mrs. Carmen should be waiting. The entrance door was made of solid wood, with details in wrought iron. Even before John could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing an elegant woman of about 60. Grey hair pulled back in a low bun, discreet but good quality clothes, erect posture that betrayed decades of good manners. Hannah, I presume. I'm Carmen Oliveira, house administrator. The woman extended her hand with a controlled smile. You arrived at the agreed time. Excellent. Hannah greeted her, trying to disguise her nervousness. Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Carmen. The house is impressive. Please come in. I'll show you the property and explain your duties. Carmen dismissed John with a wave and led Hannah through an entrance hall that looked more like a museum gallery. The high ceiling was decorated with crystal chandeliers, the walls covered with neutral-toned wallpaper, and some large canvases, landscapes and portraits that Hannah couldn't identify. What caught her attention most, however, was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise, but a particular quality of quietness that made each step echo in an almost solemn way. The house has 3 floors, Carmen explained as they walked. Ground floor with living rooms, dining room, kitchen, library and office. Second floor with guest rooms and little Clara's room. Third floor is Mr. Vincent's private area. She paused in front of a double door of dark wood. This is the library. Clara likes to play here during the afternoon. Hannah peered inside and saw shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with books in various languages. There were leather armchairs, a stone fireplace, and high windows that offered a view of the gardens. It's beautiful, she murmured. Clara is a special child, continued Carmen, resuming the tour. 5 years old, very intelligent but delicate. Lost her mother 2 years ago. Still adapting. Carmen's voice carried a careful tone as if she were choosing each word. Your job will be to accompany her during the day, help with activities, ensure she eats properly. She has some peculiarities. What kind of peculiarities? Carmen hesitated for a moment. Talks to herself sometimes. Plays with imaginary friends. Normal for a child who has experienced trauma, according to psychologists. Nothing concerning. They went up to the second floor by a carved wooden staircase. The corridor was wide, with several doors on each side. Carmen opened one of them. Your room. It's next to Clara's room to facilitate nighttime care. The room was simple but comfortable. Single bed, wardrobe, small table by the window that overlooked the back gardens. Hannah noticed there was an internal door. Direct connection to her room? Exactly. Clara sometimes has nightmares. It's important that someone be nearby. Carmen checked her watch. She should be in the garden with Sophia, our cook. How about meeting her? They went down to the back gardens, where they found a small girl playing in a miniature dollhouse built under a century-old apple tree. Clara was delicate as a little bird, chestnut curly hair tied in 2 braids, light blue dress and red sandals. She was organizing tiny furniture with impressive concentration for a 5-year-old. Clara, dear, called Carmen. This is Hannah, your new friend. The girl raised her eyes, large, dark, with a strange depth for her age. She studied Hannah for a few seconds before smiling shyly. Hi, she said in a soft voice. Are you going to live here? Hannah crouched down to be at the child's height. Yes, I am. Shall we be friends? Clara nodded, but Hannah noticed that she was looking at an empty spot next to the dollhouse, as if someone were there. Mira said you have pretty eyes, said the girl. Hannah felt an inexplicable shiver. Mira? My friend, Clara replied naturally, returning to organizing the furniture. She lives here too. Carmen cleared her throat discreetly. Clara, why don't you show Hannah your book collection? The girl got excited and pulled Hannah by the hand, leading her back into the house. As they climbed the stairs, Hannah couldn't help but ask, Carmen, was Mira Clara's mother? Carmen replied quietly. Mira Carson. She was an actress before marrying Mr. Vincent. Died 2 years ago. Accident in the garden. Clara still processes the loss in her own way. Hannah felt the weight of that information. A 5-year-old child who still talked to her dead mother. It wasn't uncommon, she knew similar cases from when she taught, but there was something about the naturalness with which Clara had mentioned the name that disturbed her. Clara's room was a child's dream. Walls painted with enchanted forest motifs, canopy bed, shelves full of books and toys. But Hannah noticed some strange details. All the dolls had dark hair, and there was a large mirror covered with a white sheet. When she asked about this, Clara shrugged. Daddy doesn't like mirrors. Carmen showed the daily schedule. Breakfast at 8, educational activities in the morning, lunch, rest, play in the afternoon, dinner at 6. Mr. Vincent works a lot, travels frequently. When he's home, he prefers Clara to be notified before any visit to his office. May I meet him? He's traveling on business. Returns tomorrow or the day after. Carmen checked her watch again. How about getting settled? Dinner is served in an hour. Hannah spent the rest of the afternoon getting to know Clara better and the routine of the house. The girl was intelligent and articulate, but there was something melancholy in her vivacity. She told stories about Mira as if she were a real friend. Where she liked to play, what songs she sang, how she combed Clara's hair before bedtime. Hannah decided not to correct or question these conversations, limiting herself to listening and participating when invited. The house had other staff besides Carmen and John. Sophia, the cook, was a cheerful woman of southern origin who prepared delicious meals and treated Clara with maternal affection. There was also Martha, responsible for cleaning, and Robert, a young man who took care of the gardens. All were cordial with Hannah, but she noticed a certain reserve, as if there were subjects that shouldn't be mentioned. During dinner, served in a dining room with a table for 12 people, a disproportion that Hannah found disturbing, Clara was talkative, telling about her favorite books and asking about Hannah's life. Were you ever married? She asked innocently. Yes, but it didn't work out, Hannah replied honestly. My daddy was also married to Mira, but she had to go away, said Clara. But she comes back sometimes to visit me. Carmen quickly changed the subject, asking about Hannah's experience with child education. After dinner, she helped Clara with her bath and put her to bed. The girl's room was in the front part of the house, with a view of the oak-lined avenue. Clara asked to leave a light on, so Mira doesn't get lost in the dark, and Hannah agreed. Finally, alone in her room, Hannah tried to process the first day. The house was beautiful. Clara was an adorable child, and the promised salary would be enough to restart her life. But there was something in the air, an unspoken tension that she couldn't identify. Perhaps it was just the weight of the tragedy. A young woman dead, a child dealing with grief, a man she had not yet met. She took a shower in the bathroom she shared with Clara, another elegant room with an antique bathtub and decorative tiles, and prepared for bed. She was exhausted, but the silence of the house kept her alert. It wasn't the comforting silence of the countryside, but something denser, as if the architecture itself held secrets. Around midnight, Hannah was awakened by a soft noise. Footsteps in the hallway. She opened the bedroom door and peeked out. The corridor was empty, illuminated only by the nightlight coming from the windows. Perhaps it was Carmen checking on Clara, or the girl herself going to the bathroom. Hannah returned to bed and tried to fall asleep again, but then she heard something that made her heart race. A female voice, very low, almost a whisper, coming from the room next door. It wasn't Clara's voice, it was an adult voice, melodious, singing a lullaby in what sounded like Spanish. Hannah got up and approached the door that connected the rooms. The voice stopped. She waited a few minutes and then carefully opened the door. Clara was sleeping soundly, regular breathing, completely relaxed. There was no one else in the room. Hannah checked the bathroom, the closet, under the bed. Nothing. But she was absolutely certain that she had heard a voice singing to the girl. She returned to her room disturbed. Perhaps it was exhaustion. the stress of recent months, adaptation to a new environment. Old houses had strange acoustics, sounds could travel in unexpected ways. Or perhaps it was the wind in the trees creating auditory illusions. But while trying to convince herself of these rational explanations, Hannah couldn't forget the naturalness with which Clara had spoken about Mira throughout the day. And there was something else, a floral perfume almost imperceptible that she had smelled in the girls' room, a perfume that definitely wasn't Clara's. Hannah finally fell asleep in the early hours of the morning, but her sleep was populated by strange dreams. She dreamed of a dark-haired woman walking through the corridors of the house, looking for something. In the dream, the woman approached her room, stopped in front of the door and whispered, "Be careful what you awaken here." She woke up with the first ray of sun coming through the window, and for a moment didn't know where she was. Then reality returned. The house, Clara, her new job. Hannah got up and went to the window. The gardens were covered by a morning mist that gave the landscape an almost ethereal aspect. In the distance, she saw a male figure walking among the trees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, wearing jeans and a white shirt. Even at a distance, there was something in his posture that conveyed authority, control. He stopped in front of the stone fountain, stood there for a few minutes as if lost in thought, and then headed toward the house. Vincent Forrester had arrived, and Hannah knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that her life was about to change completely. Hannah went down for breakfast the next morning with a strange feeling in her stomach. It wasn't just nervousness about meeting her employer, but something deeper, an uneasiness that came from the fragmented dreams of the previous night. Clara was already sitting at the breakfast table, wearing a little yellow dress and meticulously organizing her fruit on the plate, pieces of cantaloupe on one side, strawberries on the other, grapes in the center. "Good morning, Clara," said Hannah, sitting next to the girl. "Did you sleep well?" Clara smiled, but her smile had a distant quality. "Mira sang to me all night. She said you heard her too." Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine. "What did she sing?" "The Secret Garden Song. It's about a princess who hides in the flowers so no one can find her." Clara thoughtfully bit into a strawberry. "Did you like it?" Before Hannah could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Firm, measured footsteps that seemed to command the attention of the entire house. Sophia, who was serving orange juice, automatically straightened her shoulders. Carmen appeared at the dining room door, unconsciously smoothing her hair. And then he entered. Vincent Forrester wasn't just tall. He was a presence. About 6'2", broad shoulders under an impeccably pressed white dress shirt, black hair with silver threads at the temples, cut in a classic but not conservative style. He had the kind of face that seemed carved in marble, defined jawline, pronounced cheekbones, aristocratic nose. But it was his eyes that impressed the most. Steel blue, the color of cold steel, with an intensity that seemed to dissect everything they observed. He kissed the top of Clara's head with genuine tenderness, the first sign of humanity that Hannah detected in him. "Good morning, Princess. How did you sleep?" "Well, Daddy, Mira stayed with me." Clara said this with the naturalness of a child commenting on the weather. Hannah saw something quickly pass across Vincent's face, an almost imperceptible contraction around the eyes. Pain, perhaps, or irritation. "Clara," he said in a soft but firm voice, "remember what we talked about? That sometimes our imagination gets very strong," the girl recited mechanically. "But I know when it's imagination and when it's not, Daddy." Vincent sighed almost inaudibly, and then turned to Hannah. When their eyes met, she felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. There was something in that gaze that made her feel completely exposed, as if he could read not only her thoughts but her entire history. "You must be Hannah," he said, extending his hand. His voice was deep, controlled, with a slight accent that she couldn't identify. When she shook his hand, she noticed it was cold, and that he held it for a few seconds longer than would be appropriate. "Vincent Forrester, I hope you're adapting well." "Very well, thank you," she managed to reply, fighting against the disconcerting sensation that contact had caused. "Clara is a charming girl." "She is." He released her hand and headed to the head of the table, where Carmen had already placed a cup of coffee. His movements were precise, economical, like those of someone accustomed to having complete control over his environment. "Carmen told me you have experience in education." "Yes, I taught for a few years before." Hannah hesitated. She didn't want to mention the disastrous marriage in front of Clara. Before deciding to change fields, Vincent completed, saving her from embarrassment. But there was something in his tone that suggested he knew exactly what she had omitted. Changes are sometimes necessary, especially when the previous environment becomes toxic. The way he said toxic made Hannah suspect that he knew more about her story than he should. How was that possible? She hadn't provided detailed references, just the basic resume, unless he had investigated on his own. "Daddy, are you going to work today?" asked Clara, cutting the tension that was forming. "I have some calls to make, but the afternoon is yours," Vincent replied, his voice softening when speaking to his daughter. "How about we show Hannah the back gardens? There are parts of the property she hasn't seen yet." Clara got excited at the prospect. "Can I show the lake?" "Of course, Princess." Hannah spent the rest of the morning with Clara, helping her with reading and drawing activities. The girl was exceptionally intelligent for her age, but there was an underlying melancholy in everything she did. Her drawings were elaborate and technically impressive, but invariably included solitary figures. A girl sitting alone under a tree, a large house with only one illuminated window, a garden where a female shadow seemed to dance among the flowers. Around noon, Vincent appeared in the library where they were. He had changed the dress shirt for a dark polo and jeans, which made him less intimidating but no less impressive. Ready for the tour? They went out through the back gardens, following a stone path that wound between beds of orchids and native flowers. The property was larger than Hannah had imagined. Beyond the formal gardens near the house, there were wilder areas where the original forest had been preserved. Vincent walked in front, pointing out plant species and telling the history of the property. "The original house was built in 1890 by my great-grandfather, who made a fortune in railroads," he explained. "For decades it was just a summer house. My father modernized it in the 80s, and I made more adaptations when I moved here permanently." "Have you always lived here?" asked Hannah. "No. I spent my childhood between here and New York, then lived many years abroad, England, Switzerland, France. I returned to the States 5 years ago to take over the family business." He paused in front of a lookout that offered a panoramic view of the valley. "Sometimes I feel I should never have left." There was something in the way he said this, a weight, a regret, that made Hannah wonder if he was referring only to the geographical question. Clara ran ahead, following a trail that gently descended toward a denser area of vegetation. "The lake is down here," she shouted. "Be careful with the wet rocks," Vincent called back, but his voice carried more affection than concern. To Hannah, he said, "It's a natural lake, fed by a spring. Clara loves to play there, but always with supervision." When they reached the lake, Hannah caught her breath. It was a crystalline mirror of water, surrounded by rocks covered with moss and giant ferns. A small waterfall fell from a rock formation, creating soft music. There was a wooden dock that extended a few meters over the water, and Clara was already sitting on the edge, taking off her shoes. "Can I wet my feet?" she asked. "You can, but just your feet," replied Vincent. He sat on a nearby rock and watched his daughter attentively. To Hannah, he said, "She used to swim like a fish before her mother's death. Now she's afraid of deep water. It's understandable. Trauma can manifest in various ways." Vincent studied her with those penetrating eyes. "You speak as if you know from personal experience." Hannah felt exposed again under his gaze. "We all have our traumas." "True." He picked up a small stone and threw it into the water, creating concentric circles. "Carmen told me you recently lost your mother. I'm sorry." The mention of her mother caught Hannah by surprise. She had mentioned this briefly during the interview, but that Carmen had reported it to Vincent suggested a level of communication she hadn't expected. "Thank you. It was difficult. The death of someone we love changes our perspective on everything," said Vincent, his voice carrying a weight that made Hannah look at him more attentively, especially when it happens unexpectedly. There was something in the way he spoke, a barely disguised pain that made her wonder if he was referring to his own experience. "Was your wife's death also unexpected?" Vincent was silent for so long that Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Mira was always intense, dramatic. She came from theater, had this tendency to transform everything into a performance. But in the last weeks before her death, she was different. More unstable." "Unstable how?" He threw another stone into the water, this time with more force. Paranoia. Said someone was watching her, that there were secrets in the house that I was hiding from her. She began to have insomnia, lost weight, said things that made no sense. Vincent stopped as if deciding how much to reveal. The doctors said it could be late postpartum depression, although Clara was already 3 years old. Or stress. Mira always had difficulty dealing with pressure. Hannah observed Clara playing in the water, happy and carefree. It was hard to imagine that this child had gone through the trauma of losing her mother in a tragic way. How did she die? Vincent closed his eyes for a moment. She was found in the rose garden near the house. Fall from the stone stairs that lead to the upper terrace. Broke her neck. His voice was clinical, as if he were reporting a medical fact, but Hannah noticed his hands closed in a fist. It was early morning. No one saw what happened. "I'm sorry," said Hannah sincerely. "It must have been terrible for you and Clara." "Clara found the body," Vincent said abruptly. "She had left her room during the night. Sometimes she did that, looked for her mother when she couldn't sleep. It was she who started screaming." Hannah felt a knot in her stomach. A 3-year-old child finding her mother dead. No wonder Clara had developed an imaginary relationship with Mira. It was a way of processing an incomprehensible trauma. "That's why the conversations with the imaginary Mira," said Hannah. Vincent looked at her intensely. "Do you believe it's just imagination?" The question caught Hannah off guard. Well, it's normal for children who have experienced trauma to develop." "That's not what I asked." Vincent's voice had a hypnotic quality. "I asked if you believe it's just imagination." Hannah thought about the voice she had heard the night before, the perfume in Clara's room, the naturalness with which the girl talked about Mira. "I don't know," she admitted. "So there are things I can't explain." Vincent nodded slowly. "This house has a lot of history, many layers of life, death, emotion. Sometimes I have the feeling that places absorb part of those who lived in them. Have you felt anything?" He was silent for a long moment, watching Clara. "There are nights when I hear footsteps in the hallway, music coming from empty rooms. The perfume Mira used sometimes permeates the air without explanation." Vincent turned to her. "But perhaps it's just guilt, regret, the mind creating manifestations to deal with loss." "Guilt?" Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked to the edge of the lake. "Mira and our marriage wasn't perfect. In the last months we fought a lot. She accused me of things that, well, maybe some were true." Hannah felt she was treading on dangerous ground, but couldn't resist. "What kind of things?" "Emotional neglect, working too much, putting business before family." Vincent picked up another stone, but this time just held it. "Mira was a woman who needed a lot of attention, a lot of validation, and I was never good at that. Showing affection, expressing feelings. I come from a family where emotions were seen as weakness." Hannah observed his profile against the light, filtered by the tree canopy. There was something vulnerable in his posture that contrasted with the controlled image he projected. "And now? How do you feel about it?" "Like I'm paying for every moment of coldness, every lost opportunity to be a better husband, better father." He finally threw the stone, and the sound of water breaking echoed through the place, as if Mira were constantly reminding me of what I could have done differently. Clara came running back to them, her wet feet leaving marks on the wooden dock. "Daddy, I saw a golden fish, this big." She opened her arms to show the size. Vincent smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Hannah had seen in him. "Must be the koi your grandfather released here years ago. It must still be around." "Mira said it's magical," said Clara, "that it grants wishes." Vincent's smile disappeared. "Clara, it's true. She said if I make a wish really hard, the fish will make it come true." Clara clapped her hands, excited. "I'm going to wish for Mira to come back for real." Hannah saw Vincent briefly close his eyes, as if he were fighting against some internal pain. When he opened them, his expression had hardened again. "Let's go back to the house." "It's lunchtime." The way back was covered in relative silence, only with Clara chattering about the fish and plants she saw. Hannah noticed that Vincent seemed lost in thought, his expression increasingly somber. When they reached the house, he apologized and disappeared toward his office. During lunch served on the terrace overlooking the front gardens, Carmen joined them. "How was the walk?" she asked. "We saw the magic fish," replied Clara enthusiastically, "and Hannah got to know Daddy better." Carmen gave Hannah a curious look. Mr. Vincent is a complex man, very dedicated to business, very protective of Clara, but he has his difficult moments. Related to his wife's death? Among other things. Carmen served salad to Clara. He carries a lot of weight on his shoulders. The company, family responsibility, guilt about Mira. Sometimes I think he punishes himself for things beyond his control. Hannah thought about the conversation they had at the lake. Vincent seemed to be a man haunted not just by loss but by specific regrets. Were they very different? Like water and oil, replied Carmen. Mira was an artist, dramatic, emotional. Vincent is controlled, rational, pragmatic. At first that difference attracted them. Later it became a source of conflict. Carmen, said Clara suddenly, why does Daddy get sad when I talk about Mira? The older woman hesitated. Because he misses her, dear. And sometimes when we miss someone, it's hard to talk about the person we've lost. But she didn't really go away, said Clara seriously. She's just invisible now, like in a hide-and-seek game that lasts a long time. Carmen and Hannah exchanged glances. The naturalness with which Clara spoke about her mother's continued presence was both touching and disturbing. In the afternoon, Hannah helped Clara with art activities in the library. The girl liked to draw, and her work showed impressive talent for her age, but all the drawings had melancholy themes: empty houses, gardens under storms, solitary figures. Clara, why are your drawings always a bit sad? Asked Hannah. The girl stopped coloring and looked at her with those large, serious eyes. Because they're portraits. Portraits of what? Of what Mira shows me. Clara went back to coloring, as if she had given a perfectly logical explanation. She tells me about the feelings that got trapped in the house. Hannah felt a shiver. What kind of feelings? Sadness, anger, fear. Clara changed colored pencils. And love. A lot of love, but a love that hurts. Before Hannah could ask more, Vincent appeared at the library door. He had changed clothes again, now wearing a dark suit that made him look even more intimidating. Clara, I need to go out for a meeting. Be good with Hannah. He approached the table where they were working and saw Clara's drawings spread out. His expression hardened when he observed a particular illustration, a long-haired woman walking down a dark corridor. What drawing is this, Clara? Mira walking through the house at night, replied the girl innocently. She said she likes to walk when everyone is sleeping. Hannah saw Vincent's jaw tighten. Clara, we've talked about this. Mira is dead, I know, completed Clara with a matter-of-factness that froze Hannah's blood. But dead doesn't mean gone, Daddy. It just means you don't have a body anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent looked at Hannah as if searching for some kind of support or explanation. Hannah didn't know what to say. As an educator, she knew that contradicting a traumatized child's beliefs could be harmful, but the situation was clearly causing Vincent suffering. I'll be back late, Vincent finally said, his voice carefully controlled. Hannah, please keep Clara occupied with normal activities. After he left, Clara continued drawing as if nothing had happened. Hannah tried to direct the activities to happier themes, but the girl always returned to the same somber motifs. Clara, said Hannah carefully, does Mira talk to you about your daddy? The girl nodded. She says he can't see her because he's very afraid, and that makes him very sad. Afraid of what? Clara stopped drawing and looked directly at Hannah. Afraid that she knows things he doesn't want anyone to know. Hannah felt her heart race. What kind of things? But Clara had already returned her attention to the drawing, humming softly a melody that Hannah recognized. It was the same lullaby she had heard the night before. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but Hannah couldn't get the conversation out of her head. There were layers of complexity in that family that she was just beginning to discover. Vincent clearly carried guilt about his wife's death, but was it guilt of emotional neglect, or was there something more specific? After dinner, Hannah put Clara to bed. The girl again asked to leave a light on and asked if Hannah could leave the door between the rooms ajar. In case Mira wants to visit you too, she explained. Hannah agreed, although the idea made her nervous. She returned to her room, took a shower, and tried to read a book she had brought but couldn't concentrate. The house seemed different at night, more alive somehow. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind in the windows seemed to carry meaning. Around 11 at night, she heard Vincent's car arriving. Footsteps in the entrance hall, then on the staircase. He stopped in the second-floor hallway for a few minutes, probably checking on Clara, and then continued to the third floor. Hannah was almost falling asleep when she heard the footsteps in the hallway again. This time they were different, lighter, almost gliding. She got up and went to the window overlooking the gardens. The moon was almost full, illuminating the stone paths and flower beds. And then she saw it, a female figure walking through the gardens. Long dark hair that floated as if underwater, white dress that seemed to glow under the moonlight. The figure moved ethereally, not exactly walking, but floating a few inches above the ground. Hannah held her breath and leaned against the window to see better. The figure stopped in front of the stone fountain, exactly where Vincent had stopped the morning before, and turned toward the house. Even at a distance, Hannah had the clear impression that the figure was looking directly at her window. They stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Hannah knew she should back away, close the curtains, pretend she hadn't seen anything, but she was paralyzed, hypnotized by the vision. The figure raised one of her hands toward the window, not a wave, but something more like an invitation or a warning. And then, in a fraction of a second, she disappeared. Hannah stood there for a few more minutes, heart beating erratically, trying to process what she had seen. It could have been an optical illusion, shadows created by the moon and the movement of the trees, or some kind of mental projection caused by the day's conversations about Mira. But deep down she knew it hadn't been any of those things. There really was someone, or something, walking through the gardens, and that presence was aware that Hannah was watching it. Hannah returned to bed, but spent the rest of the night awake, alternating between trying to find rational explanations for what she had seen and accepting the possibility that she was living in a haunted house. Neither option was comforting. When she finally fell asleep in the early hours of the morning, she had vivid dreams of a dark-haired woman who whispered secrets she couldn't understand. In the dream, the woman held a red-covered diary and repeated like a mantra, "He loves me so much that he'll destroy me." Hannah woke up with the rising sun, cold sweat on her forehead, and the absolute certainty that her life had irrevocably changed. She was no longer just a caregiver in an isolated house. She was part of something much larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. And Vincent Forrester, with his steel eyes and his well-kept secrets, was at the center of everything. Hannah woke up the next morning with the feeling that she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes burned, her head felt heavy, and the image of the figure in the gardens persisted in her mind, like a photograph burned into her retina. She got up slowly, went to the window and observed the gardens bathed in the golden light of dawn. Everything looked perfectly normal, well-tended flower beds, the stone fountain reflecting the sky, birds singing in the trees. Nothing to indicate the supernatural presence she had witnessed hours before. Perhaps it really had been her imagination working in overdrive, fueled by stress, the change of environment, the stories about Mira. Hannah tried to convince herself of this as she got ready for the day, but a part of her knew she was lying to herself. Clara was strangely quiet during breakfast. She played with her food instead of eating, and when Hannah asked if she was feeling well, the girl just nodded vaguely. There was something different in her eyes, a distant quality, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. "Clara, did something happen?" insisted Hannah. The girl looked at her with that disconcerting seriousness. "Mira said you saw her last night." Hannah almost dropped her coffee cup. "What?" "In the gardens. She said you looked at each other." Clara cut a small piece of bread, chewed thoughtfully. "She liked you. Said you have eyes that know how to see beyond normal things." "Clara, Hannah didn't know how to respond. How could a 5-year-old child know about something she could barely process? "She wants to talk to you," continued Clara, as if she were reporting on the weather. "But not today. Today Daddy is very agitated, and that makes things more difficult for her." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Vincent appeared in the dining room, but the man who entered wasn't the same controlled and elegant one from the previous days. His hair was disheveled, there were deep circles under his eyes, and his clothes, jeans and a wrinkled dress shirt, suggested he had slept in them, if he had slept at all. "Good morning," he muttered, heading directly to the sideboard where Carmen had left coffee. His hands trembled slightly as he served the drink. "Daddy, are you sick?" asked Clara, her voice carrying genuine concern. Vincent turned to his daughter, and Hannah saw that he made a visible effort to compose a calmer expression. "Just tired, Princess. Daddy had a difficult night." Hannah wondered if Vincent's difficult night had any relation to the apparition she had witnessed. Was it possible that he had also seen something? "Vincent," said Hannah carefully, "did you notice anything unusual last night?" He looked at her over the coffee cup, and for a moment she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Why do you ask?" "I had difficulty sleeping. Thought I heard strange sounds." Vincent put down the cup with excessive care. "This house is old. It makes many sounds during the night. Wood expanding, pipes settling. Nothing that should concern you." But the way he avoided her gaze said otherwise. Hannah was sure that he had also experienced something, but wasn't willing to admit it. Carmen entered the room at that moment, carrying a tray with fresh fruit. "Mr. Vincent, Mr. August called early, said he needed to speak urgently about the export contracts." Vincent sighed heavily. "August always thinks everything is urgent." He turned to Hannah. "I have to resolve some issues in the office. Can you stay with Clara for the morning?" "Of course." He kissed the top of Clara's head and left, but not before casting a final glance at Hannah, a look that carried unasked questions and an intensity that made her stomach tighten. Hannah spent the morning trying to keep Clara distracted with normal activities, but the girl seemed unable to concentrate. She would start drawing and then stop in the middle, staring at empty spots in the room, whispering things that Hannah couldn't completely understand. "Clara, how about we read a new book?" suggested Hannah around 10 o'clock. "Mira wants to show you something," said Clara abruptly, ignoring the suggestion. "She said it's important." "Show me what?" Clara got up from the table where they were working and walked to one of the bookshelves in the library. She stood there for a few seconds as if listening to invisible instructions, and then pulled a specific book, a thick volume on American gardening. When the book came out of place, Hannah heard an almost imperceptible click. An entire section of the shelf moved a few inches, revealing that it was actually a disguised door. "Clara!" exclaimed Hannah. "How did you know there was a door there?" "Mira taught me," the girl replied simply. "She said you need to see what's inside." Hannah approached the secret passage with her heart beating hard. Behind the false shelf was a small room, more like an enlarged closet. There was a small desk against the wall, some chairs, and what appeared to be files organized in boxes. But what caught her attention most was the back wall, covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, documents, and colored threads connecting different points, like a police investigation board. "My God," whispered Hannah. In the center of the board was a large photograph of a stunning woman, wavy brown hair, expressive eyes, enigmatic smile. It was clearly Mira, but not a casual photo. It looked like a professional portrait, the kind used for theatrical promotion. Around the main photo, dozens of other images, Mira at different moments, some alone, others with Vincent, some with people Hannah didn't recognize. But what really froze her blood were the documents. Copies of medical reports, bank statements, correspondence that appeared to be between Mira and lawyers, and various handwritten notes in handwriting that Hannah didn't recognize. One of the notes said, "Investigate transfers to offshore account, August 2022. Another, "Confirm meetings with Dr. Silverton, experimental medications." "Clara, have you been here before?" asked Hannah, her voice coming out more tense than she intended. "Sometimes, when Mira wants to show me things about her life." Clara entered the small room as if it were the most natural place in the world. "She said Daddy doesn't know this place exists." Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine. If Vincent didn't know about this secret room, who had assembled that investigative board? And why did Mira, or the presence that Clara believed to be Mira, want Hannah to see it? She approached the desk and saw that there was an old laptop, apparently turned off for a long time, and several folders organized by date. The most recent folder had the label September 2022, a month before Mira's death. Hannah opened it with trembling hands and found copies of emails, all sent from an account she didn't recognize, to various recipients. One of the emails, dated 3 days before Mira's death, said, "I need more time to compile all the evidence. Vincent is suspicious, and I think Carmen may be passing information to him. Dr. Silverton confirmed my suspicions about the clinical trials. The families of the victims have the right to know the truth. I can't live with this weight on my conscience anymore." Hannah read the email twice, trying to process the implications. Clinical trials? Victims? What truth had Mira discovered about Vincent? "Hannah," called a male voice behind her. Hannah turned so quickly that she almost tripped. Vincent was standing at the entrance to the library, his expression rapidly changing from confusion to shock when he saw the secret passage open. "How did you—" he began, then saw Clara standing calmly next to Hannah. His expression hardened. "Clara, get out of here." "Now, but Daddy, Mira said that—" "Now, Clara," shouted Vincent, and the intensity of his voice made both Hannah and the girl flinch. Clara ran out, tears in her eyes. Hannah stood there, still holding the email she had found, feeling like a child caught doing something wrong. But at the same time, part of her was furious. What right did he have to yell at a 5-year-old child? Vincent entered the small room, his eyes scanning the board with an expression that mixed anger and something that looked very much like fear. "How much did you see?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Enough to know that your wife was investigating something before she died," replied Hannah, surprising herself with her own courage. Vincent closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting some internal pain. When he opened them, his expression had changed, no longer cold, but tired, defeated almost. "Mira was always paranoid," he finally said, "especially in the last months of her life. She created conspiracy theories about everything. About me, about my work, about people she barely knew." "Paranoid or well-informed?" retorted Hannah, raising the email she was still holding. "This one talks about clinical trials, about victims. It doesn't sound like paranoia." Vincent looked at the paper in her hands as if it were a venomous snake. "Where did you find that?" "It was here, along with dozens of other documents. Vincent, what really happened to Mira?" He was silent for so long that Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he walked to one of the chairs and sat down heavily, as if the weight of secrets was literally crushing. "My company develops medications," he began, his voice monotone. "Mainly for rare diseases, niche market where profits are high. 3 years ago, we started working on an ambitious project, an Alzheimer's drug that promised to revolutionize treatment." Hannah sat in the opposite chair, sensing that she was about to hear something significant. "The first laboratory tests were promising," continued Vincent, "but when we moved to human clinical trials, there were complications, severe side effects that we hadn't foreseen. Some patients developed severe neurological problems. 3 died." Hannah felt her stomach tighten. "And Mira discovered this. Mira always had limited access to my work information, but she was determined. When she wanted to know something, she found a way." Vincent rubbed his face with his hands. "She started asking questions, investigating on her own. She hired a private investigator, bribed employees, obtained confidential documents. And the documents confirmed her suspicions." Vincent nodded slowly. "Not only confirmed, she discovered that I had authorized continuing the tests even after the first serious side effects. The profit potential was immense. We're talking about a market worth billions of dollars. I hoped we could solve the problems before anyone else got hurt." Hannah looked again at the board, now seeing it in a completely different light. It wasn't paranoia. It was journalistic investigation. Mira had discovered that her own husband was involved in something that had cost human lives. "How many people died in total?" she asked. 7, replied Vincent, his voice just a whisper. 7 people who trusted in our promise of a cure and ended up killed by our ambition." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with guilt and revelation. Hannah tried to process not only what she had discovered about Vincent, but also her own contradictory reactions. She should be horrified, should want to run away from that house. But looking at him sitting there, seeing the genuine pain in his face, she found herself feeling compassion. "Was Mira planning to make this public?" she finally asked. She was collecting evidence to take to the press and authorities. She had contact with investigative journalists, with families of the victims. Vincent raised his eyes to Hannah. "The night she died, we had our worst fight. She said she could no longer live with me knowing what I had done. She said she would choose between doing the right thing or protecting our family, but not both." "And what did you say?" "That she was destroying our life because of mistakes I was trying to correct. That exposing the company would be the end of everything. Our house, our money, Clara's future." Vincent abruptly stood up and began pacing in the small space. "I said terrible things, questioned her mental sanity, threatened to have her committed, said no court would give credibility to an unstable ex-actress." Hannah imagined the scene, Vincent, with all his coldness and control, systematically destroying the confidence of a woman who had discovered the truth about him. And then? Then she left. Said she needed air, that she couldn't stay in the same environment as me anymore. Vincent stopped pacing and looked directly at Hannah. 3 hours later, Clara found her dead in the garden. Do you think she killed herself? I don't know, he answered honestly. The official report said accident. She slipped on the wet stairs during the early morning. But, he hesitated. Mira knew those stairs like the back of her hand. She had walked them thousands of times in the dark, in any weather condition. Hannah felt a shiver as she considered the implications. Do you think she was murdered? I don't know what to think, said Vincent, his voice loaded with exhaustion. All I know is that my wife died carrying secrets that could destroy my life, and that the last conversation we had was a war. Hannah observed the board again, now noticing details she had missed before. There were photographs of men in suits she didn't recognize, notes about secret meetings and unauthorized payments, and several references to a Dr. Silverton. Who is Dr. Silverton mentioned in these documents? Vincent became visibly tense. Independent clinical researcher that Mira hired to analyze our data. He confirmed that the side effects were more severe than our official reports indicated. Is he still alive? Died 6 months after Mira. Heart attack. Vincent noticed Hannah's expression. I know how this sounds, but he had heart problems for years. It was a coincidence. A lot of coincidences, murmured Hannah. Hannah, said Vincent, approaching her, you need to understand. I'm not a monster. I made terrible mistakes, made decisions that cost lives, but it was never intentional. When I realized the severity of the side effects, I cancelled the tests immediately. But the damage was already done. Yes. And since then I live with this guilt every day. He sat down again, closer to her this time. The families of the victims were financially compensated. I know money doesn't bring anyone back, but at least it ensured they didn't suffer hardship. Hannah studied his face, looking for signs of dishonesty. But all she saw was exhaustion, regret, and a vulnerability that completely contrasted with the controlled persona he normally presented. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Vincent was silent for a moment, his steel blue eyes fixed on hers. Because you deserve to know the truth about the man you're working for, and because... He hesitated, as if fighting against something. Because for weeks I haven't been able to get you out of my head. The air between them became dense, charged with a tension that Hannah had been trying to ignore since their first meeting. Vincent was leaning slightly toward her, and she could feel the heat of his body, the subtle scent of his aftershave. Vincent, she said, her voice coming out hoarser than she intended, this isn't a good idea. I know, he replied, but continued to move closer. Nothing about my life has been a good idea lately. When he touched her face with one of his hands, Hannah felt as if an electric current had run through her body. His fingers were surprisingly gentle, contrasting with the intensity of his gaze. You have no idea of the effect you have on me, he whispered, inadvertently echoing the words that Clara had attributed to Mira. For 2 weeks I've barely been able to sleep, thinking of you sleeping in the room next door. Hannah knew she should back away, should maintain professional distance, but there was something magnetic about Vincent, an attraction that went beyond the physical. It was as if she recognized in him a pain similar to her own, the pain of someone who had lost much and was trying to find a way to continue living. Vincent, I work for you. I take care of your daughter. I know, he repeated, his voice now just a whisper. But I can't keep pretending that you're just an employee. He leaned in and kissed her, and Hannah felt as if the world had stopped spinning. It wasn't a gentle or exploratory kiss, but something urgent, desperate, as if he were clinging to her to keep from drowning. Hannah should have pushed him away, should have maintained professional boundaries. Instead, she found herself returning the kiss with an intensity that surprised her. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Vincent rested his forehead on hers, his eyes closed. This is madness, he murmured. Complete madness, agreed Hannah, but didn't move away. They stayed like this for a few minutes, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, surrounded by Mira's secrets and the weight of what they had just shared. Hannah knew she had crossed a line from which she could not return, but for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. The moment was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Vincent quickly moved away, smoothing his hair and recomposing his expression. Hannah did the same, trying to appear professional despite her still racing heart. Carmen appeared at the entrance to the library. "Mr. Vincent, sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent call. Mr. August said it's about the federal auditors." Vincent briefly closed his eyes, as if returning from a dream to reality. "Tell him I'm coming." Carmen left, and he turned to Hannah. "We have to close this up," he said, gesturing to the secret room. "And no one can know that you saw these documents. Vincent, what if Mira was right? What if you're still in danger?" He stopped at the door and looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude and something deeper. "If I'm in danger, then so are you now. Please be careful." After he left, Hannah stood there for a few minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. The revelations about the medical experiments, the kiss that had completely changed the dynamic between them, the possibility that Mira had been murdered to protect Vincent's secrets. She began to organize the documents back into their places, but stopped when she found something she had missed before. A photograph of Vincent and Mira together, but not a happy photo. They were at some kind of social event, elegantly dressed, but the body language was clearly tense. Vincent had a cold, distant expression, while Mira looked at the camera with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Last public appearance, September 2022. 2 days later, he said he loved me so much that he would destroy me if necessary." Hannah felt her blood freeze in her veins. Those were almost exactly the words that Clara had attributed to Mira. "He loves me so much that he'll destroy me." With trembling hands, she put away the photograph and closed the secret compartment. But as she walked back to the room, a terrifying question echoed in her mind. If Vincent was capable of threatening his own wife, what would he be capable of doing to an employee who had discovered his secrets? And more disturbing still, why, even knowing this, did she still feel her heart race when thinking about the kiss they had shared? Hannah was falling in love with a man who could be a murderer, and the ghost of his dead wife seemed determined to ensure that she knew exactly what she was getting into. Hannah spent the rest of the day in a state of emotional shock, alternating between reliving the kiss she had shared with Vincent and processing the devastating revelations about the medical experiments. She tried to maintain a normal facade in front of Clara, but the girl seemed to pick up on her agitation with that disturbing sensitivity she possessed. "Hannah is worried," said Clara during lunch, more a statement than a question. "A little," admitted Hannah. "Sometimes adults have complicated worries." Clara nodded seriously. "Mira said you discovered things that make your heart heavy. But she also said you need to know even more things." Hannah almost choked on her food. "More things? About the man who visited Mira when Daddy traveled, and about the papers she hid in another place." Clara methodically cut her salad, and about why she can't rest. Before Hannah could ask for more details, Carmen entered the dining room with a worried expression. "Hannah, sorry to interrupt, but 2 men have arrived asking for you. They said they're from the FBI." Hannah's blood froze. "FBI? Asking for me? They're waiting in the visiting room. Mr. Vincent asked to be notified if anyone came looking for you." Hannah got up with shaky legs. Why would the FBI be looking for her? Had Vincent reported what she had discovered in the secret room? Or was it related to some investigation into Mira's death? "Clara, continue having lunch with Carmen," said Hannah, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll be back in a few minutes." In the visiting room, 2 men in dark suits were waiting for her. The taller one, with grey hair and glasses, introduced himself as Federal Agent Marcus Richards. The other, younger, identified himself only as Agent Cooper. "Ms. Hannah Vidal?" said Richards, showing his identification. "We'd like to ask a few questions about your previous employment." Hannah frowned. "Previous employment? You worked as a private tutor for the Sullivan family in Georgetown, correct? Between 2021 and 2022. Hannah vaguely remembered. She had given reinforcement classes to 2 children for a few months, before the divorce consumed all her energy. "Yes, but that was more than 2 years ago." "Why?" "Robert Sullivan was arrested last week for money laundering and criminal conspiracy," explained Agent Cooper. "During the investigation, we found your name in some documents. We need to verify if you had knowledge of illegal activities in the residence." Hannah felt relief mixed with confusion. "I just gave classes to the children. I never knew about anything irregular." "Do you remember signing any document besides the work contract?" insisted Richards. Receipts, declarations, authorizations? No. Wait. Hannah remembered something. Mr. Sullivan asked me to sign some papers when I left the job. He said they were just formalities for the company accounting. The two police officers exchanged glances. Do you have a copy of these documents? No, they never gave me a copy. Richards noted something in his notebook. Ms. Vidal, it's possible that you signed as a witness to financial transfers without knowing. You're not in trouble, but we'll need you to come to our office next week to formalize your statement. Hannah nodded, still confused. Of course, no problem. After the officers left, she stood in the visiting room trying to process this new twist. Her life was already complicated enough, without having to deal with possible involvement in money laundering. Problems with the law? Said a voice behind her. Hannah turned and saw Vincent standing at the door. He had changed clothes again, now wearing dark dress pants and a white shirt without a tie, but his sleeves were rolled up and there was something tense in his posture. Not exactly. It's about an old job before coming here. Hannah hesitated. Vincent, you didn't have anything to do with them looking for me, did you? The question seemed to genuinely surprise him. Why would I do that? After what I discovered today, I thought maybe you wanted to intimidate me or... Vincent walked up to her with measured steps. Hannah, what you discovered today doesn't leave this house. Not because I'm threatening you, but because we both know it would be dangerous for several people. Dangerous how? He stopped very close to her, and Hannah again felt that disturbing magnetic attraction. There are very powerful people involved in my company's projects, investors, politicians, researchers. If the failed experiments came to light, more people could die, completed Hannah. Exactly. Vincent raised one of his hands and touched her face, repeating the gesture from the morning. That's why I need to know I can trust you. Hannah should have backed away. She should have kept her distance from a man who had admitted to being responsible for the deaths of 7 people. But there was something in the way he touched her, a desperate tenderness, that melted her defenses. You can trust me, she said, hating herself for wanting to say it, but I need you to trust me too, completely. What do you mean? I want to know everything, about Mira, about her investigations, about what really happened the night she died. Hannah held his hand against her face. If this thing between us is going to continue, there can't be any more secrets. Vincent studied her face for a long moment. This thing between us, he repeated. You know it shouldn't exist. I know. You know I'm a destroyed man, carrying guilt that will never leave me in peace. I know. You know that getting involved with me would be selfish on my part, because I have nothing healthy to offer. Hannah moved closer to him until their bodies almost touched. Vincent, do you think I came here whole? Do you think my life wasn't equally destroyed? He lowered his head until their lips almost touched. 2 wrecks don't build something whole. Maybe not, whispered Hannah, but maybe they can stay afloat together. The kiss this time was different, slower, more conscious, loaded with a melancholy that made Hannah's heart ache. When they separated, Vincent rested his forehead on hers again. Tonight, he said quietly, after Clara falls asleep, come to my office, I'll show you everything. The rest of the afternoon passed with torturous slowness. Hannah tried to concentrate on activities with Clara, but her mind was constantly turning to the conversation she would have with Vincent. The girl, in turn, seemed especially agitated. Mira is restless today, said Clara during snack time. She keeps walking around the house looking for something. Looking for what? The papers she hid. She said she's afraid someone will find them before you do. Clara looked up at Hannah. She trusts you. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be very honest with me, okay? The girl nodded. Do you really talk to your mother, or do you sometimes just imagine what she would say? Clara was silent for a few minutes, thoughtfully chewing a cookie. Sometimes I imagine, she finally said. When I miss her, I pretend she's with me. But other times... She stopped, as if searching for the right words. Other times it's different. It's like she's really there, saying things I didn't know before. What kind of things? Like where to find hidden things, or about people I never met, or about things that happened before I was born. Clara finished the cookie. The real Mira knows things that the Mira in my imagination wouldn't know. Hannah felt a familiar shiver. The girl's explanation made a disturbing sense. How could a 5-year-old child invent specific information about secret hiding places or events that preceded her birth. And what is the real Mira trying to tell you now? That Daddy is in danger. And you too. Clara finished her snack and got up from the table. But she also said that you two love each other, and that love is sometimes the only thing strong enough to fight against the bad things. After dinner, Hannah helped Clara with her bath and put her to bed. The girl asked to leave not only a light on, but also the window slightly open, so Mira can come in and out when she wants, explained Clara. She said tonight will be special. Hannah kissed the girl's forehead and left the room with her heart beating hard. It was almost 10 o'clock, and the house had settled into its usual nighttime silence. She took a quick shower, changed clothes, choosing a simple but elegant dress for reasons she didn't want to analyze, and walked down the hallway toward Vincent's office. The door was ajar, a soft light leaking into the hallway. Hannah knocked lightly before entering. Vincent's office was exactly what she would expect: elegant, masculine, intimidating. Shelves filled with technical books and classic literature, an imposing dark wood desk, leather armchairs and paintings that seemed to be originals by famous artists. Vincent was sitting behind the desk, several documents spread out in front of him, a half-empty bottle of whiskey next to a glass. "Close the door," he said, without raising his eyes from the papers. Hannah obeyed and walked to one of the armchairs in front of the desk. Vincent raised his eyes and she saw that they were red from exhaustion, or perhaps from tears. "Do you really want to know everything?" he asked. "Yes." Vincent pointed to the documents on the desk. "These are the original reports of the clinical trials, the real ones, not the edited versions we sent to regulatory authorities." Hannah approached the desk and began to read. The documents were too technical for her to understand completely, but some details were shockingly clear. Dates of deaths, descriptions of severe side effects, notes about patients who developed seizures, paralysis, accelerated dementia. "My God," she murmured. "These patients, did they know the risks? Some knew it was experimental, but we deliberately minimized the potential risks." Vincent poured whiskey into another glass and offered it to Hannah. "We said they were mild and temporary side effects." Hannah accepted the whiskey. Although she didn't usually drink, she needed something to soften the horror of what she was reading. "Vincent, this is murder." "I know. How do you live with it?" Vincent took a large sip of whiskey before answering. "Barely. There are nights when I stay awake seeing the faces of those people. There are days when I think about turning myself in to the authorities. Why don't you do it?" "Because it would destroy Clara's life, and because—" He hesitated. "Because the others involved wouldn't allow me to survive the process." Hannah felt a chill. "What others?" Vincent got up and walked to one of the shelves. He pulled a specific book, not very different from what Clara had done in the library, and a section of the shelf opened, revealing a small safe. He typed a combination and removed a folder. "My company received funding from questionable sources. Investment groups linked to drug cartels, corrupt politicians, businessmen who launder money through medical research." Vincent returned to the desk and opened the folder. "When the tests started to go wrong, they pressured us to continue. A lot of money was at stake." Hannah examined the documents in the folder: contracts, bank transfers, photographs of meetings that looked more like mafia gatherings than legitimate business. "Were you threatened?" "Multiple times, but they prefer more subtle methods: accidents, suicides, deaths that appear natural." Vincent pointed to a specific photograph. "This man here questioned the continuity of the project 6 months before Mira. He was found dead in his apartment. Overdose of medications he didn't even take." Hannah recognized the face in the photograph. It was Dr. Silverton mentioned in Mira's documents. "My God, Vincent, do you think Mira was murdered?" "I don't think, I'm certain." Vincent finished his whiskey in one gulp. "Mira wasn't just paranoid. She had discovered things I didn't even know myself. Like the fact that our research was being funded by drug trafficking money, like the fact that some of the investors were known for eliminating problems. And she was going to denounce all this. She was already denouncing it. She had passed information to investigative journalists, to federal prosecutors, to international human rights organizations." Vincent opened a drawer in the desk and removed another set of documents. "These are emails she sent 3 days before she died. To the Department of Justice, to the FDA, to the FBI. Hannah read the emails with growing horror. Mira wasn't just investigating. She was actively exposing the entire operation. Why didn't the authorities act? Because 2 days after she sent these denunciations, she was dead, and a week later, all the emails mysteriously disappeared from government servers, along with any physical evidence she had provided. So the same people who killed Mira have influence within the government. Exactly. And that's why I could never go to the authorities. I don't know who I can trust. Hannah felt the crushing weight of the situation. Vincent wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was a piece in a much larger and more dangerous game. And now she was involved too. Vincent, why are you telling me all this? Why take the risk? He stood up and walked to her, pulling her up from the armchair. Because as insane as it seems, you are the first person in 2 years who makes me feel hope. Hope for what? That maybe there's still a way to do the right thing. That maybe I can find a way to expose all this without destroying Clara. He held her face between his hands. And because I'm in love with you. The declaration hit Hannah like lightning. It wasn't just physical attraction or mutual consolation. It was real, complicated, impossible love. Vincent, I know it's crazy. I know I have no right to drag you into this situation, but I can't keep pretending that you're just an employee. Hannah closed her eyes, trying to process the avalanche of emotions. Fear, desire, compassion, terror, everything mixed in a devastating confusion. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Vincent was watching her with a vulnerability that broke her heart. I'm in love with you too, she admitted, and that scares me more than anything you've told me. This time, when he kissed her, Hannah surrendered completely. Not just to the kiss, but to the impossibility of the situation, to the danger, to the madness of loving a man who could put her in mortal danger. His hands tangled in her hair, hers clutched at his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Hannah, whispered Vincent, if you stay with me, your life will never be simple again. It may never be safe again. My life was never simple, and safety is just an illusion. Hannah moved closer to him. The question is, are you willing to fight for us, for a chance to get out of this situation? I would do anything for you, for Clara, for a chance at redemption. Then we'll find a way together. Vincent kissed her again, and this time there was promise in the kiss, beyond passion. Promise that, regardless of the dangers they would face, they would no longer be alone. That's when they heard the scream. It was Clara, a scream of absolute terror coming from the second floor. Vincent and Hannah instantly separated and ran upstairs. Clara's room was in chaos, furniture overturned, clothes scattered on the floor, the window she had asked to leave open now violently banging against the wall. Clara was huddled in a corner, pointing to the window with eyes wide with terror. She was here, cried the girl. Mira was here, but she was very angry. She said, you're in danger. Vincent ran to the window and looked out at the gardens. Hannah went to Clara and picked her up, trying to calm her. Sweetheart, it was just a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, insisted Clara. She was here, and she said they're coming. The bad men who hurt her. Vincent turned from the window, his face pale. Hannah, take Clara. We're going to my room. Now. Why? What's happening? There are cars coming up the road without headlights. Vincent took a revolver from a drawer that Hannah didn't even know existed. And Clara is right. They're coming. Just as the three of them were leaving Clara's room, the house lights went out completely. And in the silence that followed, Hannah heard the unmistakable sound of engines stopping in front of the house. Mira had tried to warn them, but perhaps it was too late. Vincent moved with an efficiency that revealed military training Hannah didn't know about. In seconds, he had pulled 2 emergency backpacks from a hidden cabinet, checked ammunition in the revolver, and signaled for Hannah to carry Clara down the hallway toward the back of the house. How long have you been expecting this? Whispered Hannah, adjusting Clara in her arms. The girl had stopped crying but was trembling uncontrollably. Since the day Mira died, replied Vincent, guiding them down the service staircase that gave direct access to the kitchen. I knew they would eventually come after any remaining evidence. Through the kitchen window, Hannah could see figures moving through the front gardens. There were at least 4 men dressed in black, carrying what appeared to be automatic weapons. Their movements were coordinated, professional, definitely not common criminals. Daddy, whispered Clara. Mira said there's a safe path through the back gardens. She'll show us. Vincent stopped abruptly and looked at his daughter. For a moment, Hannah saw something beyond skepticism in his eyes, a desperate desire to believe that his dead wife could still protect them. "Where, Clara?" "What path?" Clara pointed to the pantry door. "Through there. She said there's a passage that Grandpa built during the war." Vincent frowned, clearly confused. "What passage? I grew up in this house. There was never—" The sound of glass breaking in the living room interrupted the conversation. Low voices in English, mixed with Spanish, echoed through the ground floor. "We'll discuss later," muttered Vincent, checking the revolver one last time. "Let's go through the pantry." The pantry was a long room full of shelves with preserves and supplies. Clara squirmed in Hannah's arms until she was put on the floor, then walked directly to the back wall as if guided by an internal GPS. "Here," she said, pressing a specific point on the wooden wall. "Mira said to push this board." Vincent hesitated for only a second before following his daughter's instructions. The board gave way, revealing a hidden hinge mechanism. An entire section of the wall opened, exposing a tunnel dug into the natural rock of the mountain. "Impossible," muttered Vincent. "How could this have existed here for decades without me knowing?" "Your grandfather built it during World War II," said Clara, with the naturalness of someone reciting a school lesson. "He was afraid of the Nazis and wanted an escape route. Mira discovered it when she was exploring the house." Heavy footsteps echoed through the ground floor, approaching the kitchen. Vincent pushed Hannah and Clara into the tunnel and closed the passage behind them. The darkness was absolute until he lit a flashlight he had pulled from one of the backpacks. The tunnel was narrow but well built, with stone walls and wooden beams that had withstood time. Hannah followed Vincent, carrying Clara again, trying not to think about the insects or animals that might have been inhabiting that underground space for decades. "Where does this lead?" she asked in a low voice. "If it was built as an escape route, it probably ends well away from the house," replied Vincent. "Maybe on the secondary road or near the lake." They walked in silence for almost 20 minutes, the tunnel occasionally branching, but Clara always indicated the correct path with a certainty that gave Hannah goosebumps. It was as if the girl were following instructions that only she could hear. Finally, they reached a stone staircase that went up toward a heavy wooden door. Vincent opened it carefully, revealing the interior of a small abandoned chapel in the middle of the forest. From the architecture, Hannah estimated it to be at least 100 years old. "I never knew this existed," said Vincent, amazed. "And it's at least a mile from the house." Clara freed herself from Hannah's arms and walked to the simple altar of the chapel. "Mira used to come here sometimes, when she wanted to escape from the house and think." The girl touched a carved wooden cross. "She said she felt safe here." Vincent checked the area around the chapel through a broken window. "I don't see anyone, but we can't stay here long." Hannah sat on one of the deteriorated benches, finally allowing the reality of the situation to hit her completely. They had narrowly escaped armed men who wanted to kill them. Vincent was a fugitive, she was an accomplice, and Clara was an innocent child in the middle of a war she didn't understand. "Vincent, what do we do now? Where can we go?" He sat next to her, the flashlight creating dancing shadows on the chapel walls. "I have bank accounts in other countries, fake documents prepared 2 years ago. We can disappear for a while. And then? Then I don't know." Vincent ran a hand through his hair. "Maybe we'll find a way to expose everything from a distance, or maybe we'll just try to build a new life somewhere safe." Clara, who had been exploring the chapel, came back to them carrying something in her hand. "Mira left this here for you," she said, offering a sealed envelope. Vincent looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. "Clara, that's not possible. Your mother died 2 years ago." "But she knew that one day you would come here," insisted Clara. "She showed me where it was hidden." With trembling hands, Vincent opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in handwriting that Hannah recognized from the documents in the secret room. "Vincent," he read aloud, "if you're reading this, it means they finally discovered the truth and tried to silence you. Forgive me for not having the courage to tell you everything while alive, but there were things I discovered that were too dangerous to share even with you." Vincent stopped reading, his voice failing. Hannah touched his hand encouragingly. "Continue," she said. "Dr. Silverton did not die of a heart attack," continued Vincent, reading. "I was with him the night of his death. They injected him with potassium to simulate a natural heart attack. I hid and saw everything. I have photographs, recordings, evidence that proves not only the deaths of the patients, but also the systematic murder of anyone who tried to expose the truth." Hannah felt her blood freeze. Mira witnessed a murder. And there are more things I didn't tell even my investigators, continued Vincent, reading. I discovered that our company wasn't just financed by cartels. It was a money laundering operation disguised as medical research from the beginning. The patients who died weren't just victims of failed experiments. They were intentionally murdered to test the effectiveness of poisons that would be used in other operations. Vincent stopped reading completely, the paper trembling in his hands. My God, Mira, what did you discover? Hannah took the letter and continued reading. The evidence I collected is hidden in 3 different locations. One you've already found, the secret room in the library. The second is in a safe at First National Bank in Arlington, under the name Maria Santos. The third, Hannah paused, checking if she had read correctly. The third is buried under the yellow rose bush in the garden, the same where my body was found. She buried evidence at the very place where she died, murmured Vincent. Vincent, read Hannah, reaching the end of the letter. If something happens to me, promise that you will use this evidence to bring justice. Not just for the patients who died, but for me. Because despite all our problems, I loved you. And I knew that deep down you were still the honorable man I fell in love with. With eternal love, Mira. P.S. Take good care of Clara. And if someday you find someone who makes you happy again, don't let guilt prevent love. I want you to be happy. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind in the trees around the chapel. Vincent was crying, the first tears Hannah had seen him shed. She knew, he said between sobs. She knew they were going to kill her, and still continued investigating. Hannah hugged him, feeling her own tears begin to fall. She was brave, and she truly loved you. Clara approached and hugged them both. Mira said now you know what to do, and that she's going to help. Vincent gently pulled away and wiped his eyes. How are we going to retrieve the evidence? The house is being watched, and probably the bank too. One step at a time, said Hannah. First we need to get out of the mountains safely, then we plan the rest. They left the chapel and followed a trail that Vincent recognized from his childhood walks. In 40 minutes they reached a secondary road where Vincent had hidden a spare car, a discreet black Subaru that he kept prepared for emergencies. Where are we going? Asked Hannah, as Vincent checked the fuel. Arlington. I have a safe apartment in Ballston that nobody knows about. We can stay there while we plan how to recover the evidence. The trip to Arlington was tense, with Vincent constantly checking the rearview mirrors and taking alternative routes to make sure they weren't being followed. Clara slept in the back seat, exhausted from the adrenaline of the escape. Hannah watched the night landscape pass by the window, trying to process how her life had completely changed in a matter of hours. The previous morning, she was a caregiver employed in an elegant house. Now she was a fugitive from professional killers, in love with a man who carried deadly secrets. What are you thinking about? Asked Vincent during a stop for fuel in a small town. About how nothing in my life prepared me for this, replied Hannah honestly, and about how even so I don't regret it. Vincent looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race, even amid the chaos. Hannah, when all this is over, we'll discover if what we feel for each other is real or just adrenaline and extreme circumstances, she completed. And if it's real? Hannah smiled for the first time in hours. Then we'll have an interesting story to tell the grandchildren. The apartment in Ballston was small but well located, in an old building with a discreet doorman who clearly was used to not asking questions. 3 bedrooms, city view, furnished in a simple but comfortable way. Vincent put Clara to sleep in the smaller bedroom. Then he and Hannah sat in the living room to plan the next steps. I need reliable contacts in investigative journalism, said Vincent. Someone with enough credibility and protection not to be silenced. And the evidence from the bank. I'll have to use fake documents to access the safe. It's risky but necessary. Vincent served 2 glasses of whiskey he had found in the kitchen. Hannah, you can still get out of this. I can give you money, new documents, a chance to start over far from all this. Hannah accepted the whiskey but set it down on the table without drinking. Vincent, look at me. He obeyed. I'm not going anywhere. Not after everything I've discovered. Not after learning the truth about Mira. Not after... She stopped, took a deep breath. Not after falling in love with you. Vincent got up from the sofa and extended his hand to her. Come here. Hannah followed him to the balcony that overlooked the city of Arlington. The lights of Washington, D.C. were visible in the distance, illuminated by the almost full moon, and the sound of distant traffic created a surreal soundtrack for the most important conversation of their lives. "Hannah," said Vincent, turning to her, "I love you. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know it's true. And I know I have no right to drag you into this situation." "You didn't drag me. I chose to stay." Hannah moved closer to him until their bodies touched. "Vincent, I spent 2 years of my life with a man who controlled me, diminished me, made me feel like I was worth nothing. When I met you, even with all your secrets and dangers, you made me feel alive again." He held her face between his hands. "You saved me too. I was dying of guilt and isolation. You brought me back to life." The kiss this time was different from all the previous ones. There was no urgency or desperation, but a serene certainty. It was the kiss of two people who had chosen to be together despite all the reasons not to be. When they separated, Vincent rested his forehead on hers. "I don't know what the future holds for us. Nobody knows, but we'll find out together." They made love that night with a devastating tenderness, as if each caress were a promise that they would survive the chaos surrounding them. Hannah discovered that Vincent was an attentive, almost reverent lover, as if she were something precious and fragile that he feared breaking. Afterward, lying intertwined in bed, she traced scars she had noticed on his chest. "Childhood accidents," he explained. "My father believed boys needed to be toughened up. It wasn't an easy childhood." "Is that why you have difficulty with emotions?" "Probably. I learned early that showing vulnerability was dangerous." Vincent kissed her forehead. "You're the first person who makes me want to be vulnerable." Hannah snuggled closer to him. "We're going to get through this, Vincent. We're going to expose the truth, bring justice for Mira and the other victims, and we're going to build a life together." "How can you be so sure?" "Because Mira is protecting us, and because we didn't live through all this just to give up now." The next morning, they were awakened by Clara entering the room and urgently whispering, "Mira said you need to leave here. Now." Vincent sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Why? What's happening?" "She saw men asking about you in the building across the street. They're going to discover where you are." Vincent and Hannah dressed quickly and began packing the few things they had brought. Through the window, Hannah could see 2 men in suits talking to a doorman in the building across the street. "How did they find us so quickly?" she murmured. "I don't know, but Clara is right. We have to go." Vincent grabbed the backpacks and checked the revolver. "There's an exit through the back that leads to a parallel street." As they descended the service stairs, Hannah wondered if it would always be like this, running, looking over their shoulder, never being able to stay in peace for long. But when Vincent held her hand and pulled her down the parallel street toward a taxi, she knew she would face anything as long as it was by his side. "Where to now?" she asked when they got into the taxi. "To the bank," replied Vincent. "It's time to recover Mira's evidence." Clara, sitting between them, whispered, "Mira said today is the day the truth will finally appear." Hannah hoped that Mira's protective presence would be enough to keep them safe during what promised to be the most dangerous day of their lives. But looking at Vincent, seeing the determination in his eyes, she knew that the moment had finally come to honor Mira's memory and seek the redemption they all desperately needed. The war was just beginning, but now, at least, they were no longer fighting alone. First National Bank of Arlington was a fortress of concrete and glass in the center of the city, surrounded by security cameras and armed guards. Vincent observed the building from a cafe across the street, wearing sunglasses and a cap to disguise his appearance. "How are we going to get in there without being detected?" asked Hannah, nervously stirring the coffee she had ordered but couldn't drink. "Maria Santos," said Vincent, showing a fake ID. "Mira created this identity 3 years ago. I have the complete documentation, including the safe key." Clara was sitting between them, coloring in a children's book that Hannah had bought at a newsstand. To any observer, they looked like a normal family out for a morning walk, but Hannah noticed that the girl constantly looked at empty spots, as if following invisible conversations. "Mira is worried," whispered Clara, without raising her eyes from the drawing. "She said the bad men are very close." Vincent discreetly checked the street around them. "How many?" "Where?" "3 in the blue building over there." Clara subtly pointed to a commercial building 2 blocks away, "and 2 inside the bank. They're waiting for you." Hannah felt her blood freeze. "How do they know we would come here?" "Because Carmen told them," said Clara simply. "Mira saw her talking on the phone." Carmen has worked for the bad men for a long time. Vincent clenched his fists on the table. Carmen, of course. She had access to all the information in the house, knew Mira's schedules, knew about the investigations, and probably it was she who revealed where Mira hid the evidence, completed Hannah. Vincent, if they're waiting at the bank, it's a trap. I know, but we need that evidence. Vincent stood up, determined. There's a service entrance in the back. If we can reach the safe without using the main entrance... Daddy, interrupted Clara. Mira has a better idea. They left the cafe and followed Clara through the streets of downtown Arlington. The girl guided them with a disconcerting precision, as if she had a detailed mental map of the city. They stopped in front of an old building that housed a law office. Mr. Robert Miller, attorney, read Hannah on the sign. Clara, why are we here? Mira said he has a copy of the evidence. She gave it to him before she died as insurance. Vincent frowned. I've never heard of this lawyer. Because Mira didn't tell you. She was afraid you would try to stop her. Clara pushed the entrance door. He's expecting you. The office was modest but organized, with shelves full of case files and a middle-aged man sitting behind a desk covered with papers. Mr. Robert Miller was thin, with grey hair, reading glasses hanging around his neck. When he saw them enter, he immediately stood up. Mr. Forrester, I was expecting you. Vincent remained tense, one hand near the concealed revolver under his jacket. How did you know we would come? Because Mira instructed me to deliver these documents only if something happened to her, and you appeared here accompanied by a woman named Hannah and little Clara. Mr. Miller observed Hannah with curiosity. She was very specific about you, ma'am. Said you would be the only person Vincent would completely trust. How is that possible? Mira died 2 years before I met Vincent. Mr. Miller smiled enigmatically. Mira was a very intuitive woman. Said she knew that Vincent would find someone special, and that this person would be key to bringing the justice she couldn't achieve in life. He opened an old safe behind his desk and removed a voluminous folder. Here is all the evidence Mira collected. Original documents, photographs, recordings, testimonies, everything you need to expose the criminal operation. Vincent took the folder with trembling hands. Why did you keep this for 2 years without doing anything? Because Mira made me promise that I would only deliver it when you came together. She said that alone you wouldn't have the courage or resources to face these people, but with the right person by your side, Mr. Miller looked at Hannah. You would have the necessary strength. Hannah felt a shiver thinking about Mira's impossible prediction. How had a dead woman perfectly orchestrated the sequence of events that would lead to her redemption? Sir, said Vincent, do you know who really killed Mira? The lawyer hesitated, then opened another drawer and removed a sealed envelope. She recorded this on the night of her death. It's a complete confession. With trembling hands, Vincent opened the envelope and removed a small digital recorder. He pressed play, and Mira's voice filled the office, alive, intense, loaded with fear and determination. Vincent, if you're hearing this, it means they finally silenced me. Today I discovered who really commands the operation. It's not just the Mexican cartels, as we thought. The boss is someone much closer. August Reynolds, your partner and best friend. Hannah gasped. Reynolds, the same man whose problems with the FBI had led her to be interrogated days before. The recording continued. August has been using your company to launder money for 5 years. The medical experiments were just a facade to justify Millionaire transfers. He planned everything from the beginning, including your co-option. Vincent, you've been manipulated from the start. Vincent sat heavily in a chair, the weight of the revelation clearly crushing him. Carmen works for August and has for years. It was she who drugged me with sedatives on the night of my death. It wasn't an accident or suicide. It was planned murder. They gave me an overdose of clonazepam mixed with alcohol, then threw me down the stairs to simulate an accident. Mira's voice began to get weaker, clearly affected by the sedatives. Vincent, I forgive you for everything. I know you never wanted people to die, but now you need to be strong. You need to honor the memory of all the victims. And I hope that one day you find someone who loves you as you deserve to be loved. The recording ended in silence. Vincent was openly crying, his hands covering his face. Hannah knelt beside his chair and hugged him. August, he murmured, my best friend since college. How could I have been so blind? Clara approached and touched Vincent's knee. Mira said you weren't blind. You trusted someone you loved, and that person betrayed your trust. It's not your fault. Mr. Miller stood up from his desk. Mr. Forrester, Mira instructed me to contact 3 investigative journalists if you came to retrieve the evidence. They are prepared to publish everything immediately, but they need you to corroborate the facts. Where are they? Hyatt Regency Hotel. We have a meeting scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Vincent checked his watch. It was 11:30 in the morning. We have enough time to get there and prepare everything. They left the office carrying the evidence that would finally give meaning to Mira's death. But when they reached the street, Hannah noticed 2 men in suits approaching from opposite directions. "Vincent," she whispered. He followed her gaze and immediately pushed Hannah and Clara into a nearby pharmacy. "Back exit, now!" They ran through the pharmacy, past confused employees, and out through an emergency door that led to a parallel street. But as they turned the corner, they almost bumped into Carmen. The house administrator was standing there as if waiting for them, wearing expensive clothes that contrasted with the image of the discreet employee she had always projected. Her smile was cold, calculated. "Vincent," she said calmly, "you were always too naive for this game." Vincent pointed the revolver at her, but Carmen laughed. "You won't kill me, Vincent. You're not a murderer unlike some people we know. You killed Mira. I followed orders. Mira was becoming a problem for many important people." Carmen gestured slightly, and Hannah realized there were at least 4 armed men nearby. "Now you and your new girlfriend have also become problems." Clara freed herself from Hannah's hand and walked directly to Carmen. "Mira wants to talk to you." Carmen frowned. "What is this child saying?" "She wants you to know that she forgave you," said Clara seriously, "because you too are a victim of August. He promised to take care of your family if you did what he ordered." Carmen's face paled. "How can this child know that?" "Because Mira is here," replied Clara simply. "And she said you can still choose to do the right thing." For a moment, Carmen seemed genuinely shaken. Hannah saw tears form in her eyes, a humanity that had been hidden behind the professional mask. "It's too late," murmured Carmen. "He has my daughter. If I don't—" "Carmen," said Vincent, lowering the gun slightly, "we can protect your family. But you need to help us." Carmen looked around, clearly in internal conflict. Hannah could see the battle happening in her mind, years of forced loyalty against the chance to finally do what was right. "August is at the hotel," she finally said, "waiting for you at the meeting with the journalists. It's a trap." "How many men does he have?" 12. "Whole armed, all willing to kill." Carmen took a deep breath. "But there's a way to reach the journalists without going through the main reception." She guided them through a complicated sequence of streets and alleys, explaining that there was access to the back of the hotel through the service parking lot. Vincent kept the gun in hand, but Hannah noticed that he had begun to trust Carmen, or at least the possibility of redemption she represented. The Hyatt Regency was an icon of the city, and its service area was a labyrinth of corridors and freight elevators. Carmen led them to a specific elevator that gave direct access to the upper floors. "Penthouse," she explained. "The journalists are in the presidential suite." When the elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor, they were greeted by 3 people, 2 women and a man, all with the appearance of serious journalists. "Mr. Forrester," said the older woman, extending her hand. "I'm Catherine Matthews from the Washington Post. These are my colleagues Anna Parker from the New York Times and Richard from CNN." Vincent handed over the evidence folder. "Here's everything. Documents, recordings, photographs, evidence enough to bring down a criminal operation that killed at least 15 people." While the journalists examined the material, Hannah kept Clara close and watched Carmen, who seemed increasingly nervous. "This is extraordinary," said Richard after listening to part of Mira's recording. "With this material, we can publish a complete series that will expose the entire operation." "When?" asked Vincent. "Tonight, simultaneously in all outlets," replied Catherine. "But we need you safe before publishing. These people will try to eliminate the sources." That's when they heard footsteps in the hallway. Many footsteps approaching rapidly. Carmen paled. "They found out." The suite door opened violently, revealing August Reynolds accompanied by 6 armed men. Vincent had been right about August being manipulative. He was exactly the type of man who inspired confidence with a warm smile and charismatic presence. But now his eyes revealed the coldness of a killer. "Vincent, my old friend," said August as if he were arriving for a normal business meeting, "you've always been terrible at choosing allies." Vincent pointed the revolver at August, but he was clearly outnumbered. "Why, August? Why did you do this to me?" "I did it for you, Vincent. Your company was failing when you took over. I saved your business, brought investors, created opportunities." August gestured for his men to surround the group. "You should be thanking me. You killed innocent people. I killed a few to save many. Operations like ours, finance hospitals, schools, legitimate research. It's a matter of perspective." Hannah, holding Clara close to her chest, saw that the girl was strangely calm, almost expectant. "Uncle August," said Clara suddenly, using a term of affection that made everyone stop moving. "Mira wants to talk to you." August laughed, but Hannah noticed a slight hesitation in his eyes. "Clara, dear, your mother can't talk to anyone anymore." "Yes, she can. She's here now." Clara pointed to an empty spot beside August. "She said you loved her too, and that's why you became so jealous when she discovered the truth." August's smile completely disappeared. "What is this child talking about?" Vincent, who was observing the conversation, felt all the pieces fall into place. "You were in love with Mira. Don't be ridiculous. That's why you wanted to keep me away from her. That's why you orchestrated problems in my marriage, brought temptations, created conflicts." Vincent kept the gun pointed at August. "You thought that if my marriage ended, she would be with you." August didn't answer, but his expression confirmed the accusation. Clara continued speaking as if she were repeating words that only she could hear. "Mira said you cried when she died, and that's why she forgave you too. But she wants you to tell the truth to everyone." "Enough!" shouted August, completely losing his composure. "Enough of this madness!" It was at that moment that Carmen made her final choice. In a quick movement, she pulled a gun she had hidden in her purse and pointed it at August. "I'm sorry, August, but I can't live with what we did anymore." What followed was chaos. August's men turned to Carmen. Vincent shot to protect her. The journalists ducked, seeking protection. Hannah pushed Clara behind a sofa and tried to protect her with her own body. When the shooting stopped, 3 of August's men were dead. Carmen was wounded but alive, and August was lying on the floor, hit by a shot to the chest. Vincent knelt beside his ex-best friend, who was breathing with difficulty. "August? Why? We were like brothers." August smiled weakly, blood foaming on his lips. "Because you had everything I wanted. The company, the success, Mira." His voice was failing. "I just wanted to be you." He died with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, and Hannah felt a strange sense of closure, as if a cycle of violence and betrayal had finally come to an end. Clara got up from the hiding place and walked to the middle of the destroyed room. Mira said now it's time for her to go away. "Go away where, sweetheart?" asked Hannah gently. "To the place where people who have already died rest in peace." Clara smiled for the first time in days. She said that now that the truth has appeared, she doesn't need to stay here taking care of you anymore. Vincent approached his daughter and knelt to her height. "Clara, will you miss Mira?" "I will, but she said that whenever I feel homesick I can look at the stars and remember that she's well." Clara hugged Vincent. "And she said that now you can be truly happy because you did the right thing." Hannah joined the hug, feeling that finally, after months of mystery, danger, and revelations, they could begin to build something new on the ruins of the past. The journalists, even shaken by the confrontation, managed to keep their promise. That same night, the main media in the country simultaneously published the complete exposure of the criminal operation. Documents, recordings, photographs, everything came to light, creating a national scandal that resulted in the arrest of dozens of people involved, from politicians to businessmen. Vincent fully cooperated with the authorities, providing details that helped dismantle the entire network. As he had predicted, he was indicted for his participation in the experiments, but the cooperation and the fact that he had been manipulated resulted in a suspended sentence and community service. 6 months later, Hannah woke up on a sunny morning in the new house they had bought in a small town in the Shenandoah Valley. It was a simple but cozy property, with gardens where Clara could play and enough space to start over away from the media spotlight. Vincent was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, wearing an apron that Hannah had given him as a gift and humming softly, signs of a lightness she had never seen in him before. "Good morning," she said, hugging him from behind. "Good morning, my love." He turned in her arms and kissed her softly. "Is Clara up yet?" "Still sleeping." "Yesterday was a long day with therapy." Clara was having regular sessions with a child psychologist, finally processing her mother's death in a healthy way. The conversations with Mira had completely ceased after the events at the hotel, as if the protective presence had finally found peace. "Hannah," said Vincent, moving slightly away to look into her eyes, "there's something I want to ask you." He knelt in the kitchen, pulling a small velvet box from the pocket of his apron. Hannah felt her heart race. "Hannah Vidal, you entered my life when I was lost in darkness. You brought me back to the light, helped me find the courage to do what was right, taught me that it was still possible to love and be loved." Vincent opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Hannah couldn't speak for a few seconds, tears of happiness blurring her vision. When she finally managed to respond, her voice came out as a whisper. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." He placed the ring on her finger and stood up to kiss her, a kiss that savored the promise of a future finally free from the past. "Wow," said a small voice behind them. Clara was standing at the kitchen door, still in pajamas, smiling from ear to ear. "Does this mean Hannah is going to be my real mom?" Hannah bent down and hugged the girl. "If you want, sweetheart." "I want that very much." Clara hugged her tightly. "Now we're a real family." Vincent joined the hug, and Hannah felt that she had finally found the place where she belonged. Not just a physical place, but an emotional place. A family formed not by blood, but by choice, by love, by shared overcoming. "You know what's funny?" said Hannah, still embraced with the two. "I came to the mountains thinking I was just looking for a job. And you found much more," replied Vincent. "I found you. I found a new life. I found who I really am." Clara moved slightly away and looked at the two adults with that seriousness that sometimes made her seem older than her 6 years. Mira was right. She said that love is the only thing strong enough to heal any wound. Hannah and Vincent looked at each other over the girl's head, both thinking of the extraordinary woman who had orchestrated their meeting, even after death. Mira had found a way to protect her family and ensure that Vincent would find not only justice, but also a second chance at love. "To Mira," whispered Vincent. "To Mira," agreed Hannah. And on that sunny morning in a simple kitchen in a house in the Shenandoah Valley, 3 people who had gone through darkness finally found their light. Love had conquered fear, truth had triumphed over lies, and a family had been born from the ashes of tragedy. Hannah knew there would still be challenges. Vincent was still dealing with the legal consequences of his past actions. She still had moments of anxiety about their safety, and Clara still had occasional nightmares. But now they would face everything together, as a real family, built on solid foundations of true love and mutual trust. 6 months later, on their wedding day, as she walked down the aisle of the small local church toward Vincent, Hannah thought about the entire journey that had brought them there. From the broken woman who had arrived in the Blue Ridge Mountains to the radiant bride who now promised eternal love to the man of her life, it had been a complete transformation. Vincent waited for her at the altar, impeccable in a simple suit, Clara at his side as flower girl, and Hannah knew that every moment of pain, every night of fear, every shocking revelation had been worth it to reach this perfect moment. When the minister asked if she took Vincent as her husband, Hannah responded with a certainty that echoed through the small church. "I do." And when they kissed as husband and wife, Hannah could have sworn she felt a soft breeze touch her face, like a final goodbye from Mira. Finally at peace, blessing the union she had made possible. Some love stories are born in the light. Others, like theirs, are born in darkness, but find enough strength to create their own light. And that light Hannah knew would shine forever.